Hey, what's going on, everyone? Really excited to share the books that I've selected for my pile of possibilities for quarter one of Historathon. For those who don't know what that is, it's a year-long reading challenge all about reading nonfiction history books. Really exciting. We have a nice active Discord. I think we're approaching 400 members. But anyways, I'll leave a link to all of our announcement videos down below. I was wearing armor in mine, so definitely check those out for sure. And I'll even link the creator and the other co-hosts what their pile of possibilities are. I'm just really late to the party per usual, but quarter one is all about from prehistory down through the year 500 CE, so pretty much the ancient world and the classical world, at least in the West and everything. So I have a lot of Greek books. One of my goals for 2026 is kind of like my vague personal curriculum on Greece. So we'll do those ones last just because there's a whole boatload of them. But let's just go ahead and get started. So roughly, kind of in chronological-ish order, we have The Secret World of the Denisovans by Sylvana Condemi and Francois Sabatier, the epic story of the ancient cousins to sapiens and Neanderthals. Yeah, I guess that was the subtitle. I was like, why is there another like blurb there? Anyways, this is a book all about the Denisovans. So Denisovans is a species in the hominin group that was kind of just recently, I guess, well, the book will kind of explain a little bit better than I'm going to, sort of described about like 10 or 15 years ago. The problem is it's mostly, I guess, considered something like a ghost species in the sense of we have so little fragmentary evidence. Like, I think it's just a couple of like phalange bones from a hand. However, based on DNA analysis, it's definitely like another species, but we have no like actual skeleton to like base it on. So it's just kind of a really interesting sort of concept and all that. And anthropology is something I'm like super late to the game, kind of like studying and reading. I did read Kindred a couple of years ago when it first came out about Neanderthals. That was super fantastic. Encourage anyone to read that one as well. I don't really know anything about the Denisovans except they were, like I said, a hominin kind of out like in the steppe plateau ish of Eurasia, and that's about it. So I started this book, maybe summertime of last year, and just I got about probably a third of the way through, and then I think I didn't like intentionally DNF it. I think I just started reading other stuff and kind of like forgot about it, if that makes any sense. But like I said, just want to kind of get on with the prehistory stuff. Then we have Life in the Ancient Near East by Daniel Snell. And I have two books. I think I also have Jean Botero's one. I think I read that one quite a while ago. But social history is definitely something I'm a little bit more interested in. I want to know how like people lived, what they worked, what did they think, what did they do in their free time, and all that kind of stuff. And this is what this book does, based on the 10 anyways, throughout Mesopotamian history. And I think it's the entire like ancient Near East from basically Sumer down, I want to say through the Persian era. Yeah, 332, so roughly till when Alexander kind of takes over and screws everything up, sort of. So anyways, there's that one. And then for my favorite Bronze Age culture, I don't know if I'll get to it, but this is like the standard work on the Hittites. I think I've read 3 or 4 books on the Hittites. Like I said, they're my favorite Bronze Age culture. Doesn't everyone just have a favorite Bronze Age culture? And this is The Kingdom of the Hittites by Trevor Bryce. This is the first edition. There is a newer edition. This came out, looks like in 98, and I think the second edition came out like maybe like 10 years ago. Not 100% sure how different they're going to be, but that one is like $500. Maybe not 500. It's in the hundreds anyway, so I could not find a used copy like anywhere, so for a decent price. So we're gonna stick with the first edition here. Like I said, I just really enjoy the Hittites. When you make your mark on the world stage by basically just showing up and sacking the Babylonian capital, or the Babylonian capital, and just kind of like, we're just gonna like kind of go back and everything. But they're actual like I said, if you like study them a little bit more, like even like just their like kind of code, like like law codes and stuff are a little bit different compared to like the old Babylonian period and stuff. So I just find it really, really cool. And then one other culture that I want to like, the one like non-Western one that I want to like start reading a little bit more about is, last year I read William Dalrymple's The Golden Road, How Ancient India Transformed the World. And I enjoyed it quite a bit. It's a little scattershot because it's not really a narrative chronological history. It's kind of, these are like the things India like kind of did to help out with, with Buddhism and with with mathematics and arithmetic and stuff. And I learned a lot. But now I kind of want like an actual kind of just like narrative history book to kind of get a nice sweep of like the whole kind of era and everything. So I'm going to put a couple of them like up here. I haven't decided which one yet. If you know any of these authors, or all of them have pretty decent reviews and stuff, or if you've read any of them, let me know in the comments down below so I can go ahead and select one. All right, so now let's go on. Let's go on to ancient Greece. So we got a boatload of ancient Greece, and then I got a couple slightly, I think, like more like Roman period ones. I don't know why I said like slightly more Roman. It like is more Roman period ones than classical Greece. So let's just go ahead and get started. So for some kind of like philosophy / history books, I have right here Diogenes, The Rebellious Life and Revolutionary Philosophy of the Original Cynic by Inger Kuhn. And this is, like I said, kind of a life and times of Diogenes, who is famous for, living in a ceramic pot. He gets memeified like a ton on the internet and stuff, but I feel like there's probably a lot more kind of going on there than meets the eye. And like I said, he kind of told Alexander the Great to F off in that kind of like spurious kind of like legend memoir where he says, "Hey, get out of my son," basically. So props to him for that. And then another one here is How to Think Like Socrates: Ancient Philosophies of Way of Life in the Modern World. That's probably stretching it. This is more of like a side quest. If you're on the Discord, you'll know what side quests are for Historathon. So this is kind of this is by Donald Robertson. I really enjoyed, like I said, I can't stand like broicism and stoicism and stuff, but I did really enjoy his How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, which is kind of like philosophy and like Marcus Aurelius and that kind of stuff, kind of all mishmashed together. And I feel like it's going to be the same thing, but with Socrates and the Socratic method. So kind of like looking forward to that. So now on to like a couple of history proper. We have here The World of Odysseus in my nice Folio Society edition. Don't ask me why I haven't read it yet. It just looks super fantastic. This is by Mark Finley. I want to say this originally came out in the 50s. Let us see. Yeah, it looks like, yep, The World of Odysseus, Viking Press, 1954. So this is all about kind of like the material culture of like kind of Homeric age Greece, so the Dark Ages of Greece and stuff. I think it's going to be really cool. I don't know if it goes back into the Mycenaean age or not. I think it probably should, and probably does if it's Finley. But like I said, just a really kind of nice material culture history book. And then let's see what we got here. We got another biography. Life and Times, more than a biography. We probably couldn't do a whole biography on Eratosthenes, but we have Circumference, Eratosthenes and the Ancient Quest to Measure the Globe. So Eratosthenes was famous for being the library director, so I have a nice kinship with him being a library director, except he was the director of the Library of Alexandria. A lot more responsibility and gravitas there than my little rural library. But he was pretty famous for calculating the circumference of the planet to within a couple hundred kilometers, I believe it was. I think it was within like 2 or 3%. I just find that like super crazy. And in the ancient world, he was known as like the number 2 guy. And it's kind of like, I guess, like an inside joke, because apparently you could take like almost any academic subject, like geography or mathematics, geometry, ethics, whatever. And he was like the second best like scholar in that category, just because he was like so diverse and so like wide, like ranging with his like scope of interest. So he was never like the best at anything, but he was always the second best in like a bazillion things, which I think is actually pretty cool. Now we got a whole bunch of like other stuff, like just kind of Greek culture tangent stuff, like I said, kind of related to my goal of like just studying Greek character, Greek culture, Greek ways of life, if that makes any sense. So I have this series. I don't know if you probably don't see very often because it's on the top shelf, and it's called Our Debt to Greece and Rome. There's like nothing really like on the covers. I don't know if they had slip dust jackets. None of mine do. But the spine's actually kind of neat because they got like the Greek and the Roman little coins there. This one is Love of Nature Among the Greeks and Romans by Henry Clow, and I don't know anything about it. Some of them are like really like esoteric. Like there's like studies of like Aristotle's rhetoric. There's like a whole bunch of like just like the a Socrates is like essays or like speeches and stuff. Like it's pretty kind of out there. I've only read a handful of them, but like I said, this one, Love of Nature Among the Greeks and Romans. I just feel like, what did they think about nature? Why did they like it? And how did they enjoy it? That just sounds, that sounds like a book for me, for sure. So one that I keep like putting in my TBRs and never getting to, but I really need to this time, is Max Pollan's Freedom in Greek Life and Thought, The History of an Ideal. And this is all about the Greeks, like kind of differing concepts of freedom, whether that's personal freedom, political freedom, and social freedoms, different stuff like that, and how different like poles kind of interpreted that differently, how over time that kind of changed, and how they had to kind of find nuance to still say they were free, even though they're kind of like under the yoke of Rome, for example. Different stuff like that. Like I said, it just sounds really interesting. I think it's be pertinent for today's day and age for sure. One I picked up last year that maybe I'll find someone who's smarter than me to buddy read with me so I can get more out of it is Ellen Wood's Peasant, Citizen, and Slave, The Foundations of Athenian Democracy. So this is like an economic history of like kind of classical Athens. I want to say the argument is sort of about how it was the material culture and conditions that sort of allowed Athenian democracy to be kind of like that, like super universal, like open democracy that we kind of like recognize it for, and how I want to say there was basically something. I don't want to say middle class because that's like I said, that's kind of putting like our own kind of like terms back then. But how there was a lot of like small landholders as compared to like something like Rome, where they they had oligarchy and some like democratic stuff with the assemblies and everything, but really the aristocracy kind of pulled like all the strings there, whereas in Athens that was tempered down quite a bit. I'm sure there were still like the bigwigs like pulling a lot of the levers and stuff. But how all that kind of, like I said, all these like kind of little like landholders making up that kind of independent class was sort of subsidized by like slavery and stuff. I'm not, like I said, I'm probably butchering this whole argument, which is why I need to read the book, but it sounded really interesting, and on the Discord people really spoke highly of this work, so I will be getting to it at some time. One I'm really excited for is I do think I am like there will be a buddy read of Paideia, The Ideals of Greek Culture. This is the first volume of a trilogy, Archaic Greece, The Mind of Athens by Werner Jaeger, and this is just a book that's going to be steeped. Just like there's going to be so many anecdotes and references to Greek stuff, like Greek tragedies, just Greek mythology, Greek writers, philosophy, all that kind of stuff. And it's just talking about how did the Greeks actually view, like regular Greeks, what did they actually think the good life was? How did they like shape their character? Whether that was like some of them, became athletes at the gymnasia, and like kind of like striving and all that kind of stuff. How did that work? The philosophers and stuff, how do they go about creating and shaping? It's just, I don't know. I'm probably doing this one a disservice as well, but like I said, it's all about, like I said, Paideia is kind of like the education of character. It's kind of a weird word that doesn't have like a good translation and everything, but super, super excited. This was just like the thing back in like the 40s or 50s when it was first like published, I want to say. Dun, 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 dun. Yes. Apparently 39. So apparently this was the thing, and apparently it's just like a hidden gem that I'm like super looking forward to. Thucydides is a historian that comes up quite a bit, obviously with his history of the Peloponnesian War. I have like 6 books. I have 5? Besides Thucydides, I have 5 books on Thucydides. I've only read 2 of them, so I figure I might as well get another one. This one is The Necessities of War, A Study of Thucydides' Pessimism by Peter Pouncey. And I'm not gonna lie, I've never heard of Peter Pouncey, and the only reason I picked it up was the cover was nice with the terracotta artwork. But also it was like a book on Thucydides I had never heard, and happened to be in a bookstore, and it's like, Thucydides' Pessimism, which, I would probably be pretty pessimistic too if, for those who don't know, Thucydides was a general in one of the Strategoi on the Athenian side during the Peloponnesian War, and he gets sacked as a general and fired and exiled, largely for a loss that really wasn't his fault, if that makes sense. There wasn't really anything he could have done about it. But he gets fired, and then he just spends the rest of his time kind of studying the Peloponnesian War. So, I'm sure there's a lot of good tidbits in there. So now on to kind of some of the Roman era-ish stuff. We have craftsmen in Greek and Roman society, and like I said, this is just kind of a nice social history. I'm hoping about how do people like kind of live and work, especially with, like, with their hands and stuff in the classical world. This was by Alison Burford in this 1972. So like I said, I do some woodworking and stuff, so I'm gonna really enjoy if they have like kind of a carpentry woodworking kind of chapter in here. Like I said, just a really nice social history I'm hoping for. And then we got 3 Romanish ones. We'll save the best one for last here. I guess the last 2 are both like tied. This one is The Galatians by John Granger. And for those who don't know who the Galatians were, they were like a Celtic people who effectively were able to kind of march out from their part in like Eastern Europe down and settled in what is now Turkey. It's for those who know the New Testament, like Paul's epistle to the Galatians is written to these people. They made their, like I said, their own like kind of little state just by taking it over and everything, and kind of just like hung around for a couple hundred years. So I just want to learn a little bit more about them. Like I said, the Celts kind of get dunked on at that part in like kind of Roman history. So it would be kind of interesting to learn some of the kind of like Roman Empire era stuff. And then we have Dexter Hoyos's Carthage's Other Wars, Carthaginian Warfare Outside the Punic Wars against Rome. So Dexter Hoyos is like kind of a leading world authority on the Punic Wars. And this is a book all about Carthage's military stuff besides the Punic Wars. So I think this is going to be really interesting. Carthage has like a ton of history, especially in Sicily, fighting the Greeks, besides just the Romans, even like the Etruscans and stuff they fought. So it's going to be kind of interesting too, like kind of learning about how they kind of took over Africa, if we know really anything about that, and as they expanded their kind of like African empire and everything. Maybe even just like kind of how they hired mercenaries, because like they're kind of famous for being mostly like a mercenary force for the most part, which is actually kind of a weird, kind of different, like compared to like a lot of like what you always think of, the Roman Republic citizen soldiers and all that kind of stuff. But anyways, like I said, really looking forward to that one. I love Carthage. And then we also have Hannibal's Oath, The Life and Wars of Rome's Greatest Enemy by John Previs. And this is just another book on Hannibal and the Punic Wars that on my shelf that I haven't read yet, so I need to get to it. I just really enjoy Hannibal. He's like he's probably my favorite. If I really had to like pick someone, he's probably like my favorite figure from the Roman Republican era, even though he's not Roman. So yeah, just like I said, just another one will be like a nice, easy kind of comfort read. And then there's one more book I forgot to mention because it's not out quite yet, and it is what is it called? Island at the Edge of the World: The Forgotten History of Easter Island by Mike Pitts. And this looks like it's just kind of a nice history of Rapa Nui, also known as Easter Island. There's been a lot of understanding on, they're probably most famous for those giant like stone monolith heads, and there's been a lot of research on how those were in the past couple of years, on how they were actually built and moved and everything, and how the fridge walk, where you kind of just like take the corners and lift the corners up like that, was actually probably used, granted they were using like ropes and pulleys and stuff to do it, rather than like on like logs and kind of rolling them around and stuff. So I think it's gonna be super interesting. I read a book on the sea, it was called Sea Peoples, about just kind of how Polynesian explorers and stuff, like how did they like actually go sailing and discover these islands and everything. So I kind of want to read a little bit more about that when I saw it coming out, I think later this month. So that might be one that I pick up as well. So there you have it. There's a whole bunch of random ancient history, mostly Greek stuff, though. There's a lot of Greek stuff. Like I said, that's just kind of like my wheelhouse right now. It is good to expand and try different things. However, with my fiction reading, I'm going to be reading like a whole boatload of fiction that I don't want to say I don't care for, but I'm going to be trying out a lot of different stuff just as part of like my work at the library with like mysteries and romance and thrillers and stuff. So I feel like I will kind of want my nonfiction to be my comfort read this year rather than the other way around. So anyways, I hope you find something enjoyable in this list. If you want to join Historathon, definitely let us know. Participate. It's super fun, super easy. You don't have to join the Discord if you don't want to. I will say it's pretty active and lots of good recommendations being thrown around, buddy reads all over the place, so that's really great. And anyways, whatever you end up reading the rest of the year, whether it's history or not, always remember, read victoriously.